Okay, let's talk about a book that's over 600 years old but is way funnier, sharper, and honestly more shocking than you'd ever expect. We're diving into Geoffrey Chaucer's incredible, unfinished masterpiece, The Canterbury Tales. And seriously, try to forget whatever you remember from high school English class. This is not homework. This is a brilliant, rowdy, and deeply human story about a world that you'll see feels surprisingly close to our own. Let's get into it. First things first, to really get Chaucer, you have to understand the world he was living in. And his world was absolutely shaped by a catastrophe that's almost impossible for us to wrap our heads around. During his lifetime, the Black Death just tore through Europe, killing more than a third of the entire population. Think about that. This wasn't some distant headline for Chaucer. This was the air he breathed. It was the reality right outside his door. And believe it or not, the plague was just the beginning. Chaucer lived through the seemingly endless Hundred Years' War with France. He saw the violent Peasants' Revolt in 1381, where these angry mobs stormed London and actually executed the Archbishop of Canterbury. So what's really key here is that Chaucer wasn't writing about chaos from some safe distance. He was living smack dab in the middle of it. So who was this guy who not only survived this brutal century, but somehow managed to turn all that turmoil into one of the greatest works in English literature? Well, he was a whole lot more than just a poet with a quill pen. I mean, look at this resume. Chaucer was a man who was deeply, deeply involved in the real world. He was a soldier, got captured in France, worked as a diplomat on secret missions. Some even think he was a spy. He managed the wool trade as a customs inspector, and he even served in Parliament. See, he wasn't sitting up in some ivory tower. He was on the ground, watching every level of society, from kings to con artists. And that real-world experience is what makes his writing feel so, well, real. All that first-hand knowledge of humanity, it feeds directly into the genius premise of his final work, The Canterbury Tales. Honestly, you can just think of it as the original, and maybe the greatest, road trip story ever told. The whole setup is just beautifully simple. You've got this random group of people from all walks of life who all happen to be at the same London inn. They're all about to set off on a pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral. So, to liven up the long ride, the inn's host proposes a game. Everyone tells 2 stories on the way there and 2 on the way back. And the prize for the best story? A free meal. It's such a simple idea, but it opens the door to this incredible universe of different voices and stories. Now, you have to understand, the whole idea of a pilgrimage was central to medieval life. In theory, it was this profoundly spiritual act. You journey to the shrine of a saint to make up for your sins, or maybe to give thanks for a blessing, or to pray for a miracle. It was supposed to be an act of pure devotion. But, and this is where Chaucer's genius really kicks in, he shows us the huge gap between that sacred ideal and the messy reality. For a lot of people, a pilgrimage was the only chance they'd ever get to travel and escape their daily grind. It was part religious duty, sure, but it was also part medieval vacation. Critics at the time were always complaining that these trips were just excuses for drinking, gossiping, and all kinds of bad behavior, and Chaucer just leans right into that tension. And there's one more layer here. For the truly devout characters like the parson, this physical journey to Canterbury is also a metaphor for the great spiritual pilgrimage of life itself. The ultimate destination isn't some cathedral in Kent, but heaven, what he calls the celestial Jerusalem. So this whole road trip is also about the journey of the human soul. Pretty deep, right? So how does Chaucer make these characters feel so incredibly real? Well, he uses a literary tool that his audience would have totally gotten right away. It's almost like a shared inside joke. It was a really popular genre called estates satire, and the concept is super simple. You know how a modern comedian has a whole routine about, say, lawyers or baristas? Well, medieval audiences had a set of well-known stereotypes for every single profession or estate. It was basically comedic shorthand for talking about society. And you can see exactly how Chaucer puts it to work here. The running gag was that all millers were these big, brawny cheats who stole grain. And yep, Chaucer gives us a miller who is exactly that. The cliché was that partners were snake oil salesmen selling fake holy relics, and that's precisely who Chaucer's partner is. He uses these familiar stereotypes as a starting point, like a foundation to build his characters on. But here's the real magic. Chaucer takes these, one-dimensional stereotypes, and he breathes so much life into them that they become these unforgettable, three-dimensional people. So let's meet a few of the most iconic travelers on the road to Canterbury. First up, we've got the knight. He's presented as the moral compass of the entire group. He is the absolute gold standard of behavior, and every other pilgrim is kind of judged against him. This guy is the real deal. He's a veteran of major campaigns from Lithuania all the way to North Africa, a true warrior for his faith. And yet, despite this incredible record of valor, he is the picture of humility. His armor is practical, not flashy, and his manner is gentle. He completely embodies the code of chivalry. And the narrator just gives us this perfect, simple summary. He was a ver parfait gentil knight. He was a true, perfect, gentle knight. In just a few words, we get everything we need to know about his character. He's not just playing a role, he is the ideal. And then, for a complete 180, Chaucer gives us the friar. If the knight represents the ideal of society, the friar shows us just how deeply that ideal could be corrupted, especially within the church itself. So, a friar's whole vow was to live a life of poverty and serve the most vulnerable people. But this friar? Oh no, he actively avoids lepers and beggars because, there's no money in it. Instead, he spends his time in taverns, charming wealthy landowners and pretty women, offering to forgive their sins for a price. He is a complete betrayal of everything he's supposed to stand for. So you see what Chaucer's doing here, right? He masterfully places these two figures right next to each other. The knight lives to serve a higher cause. The friar lives only to serve himself. And through them, Chaucer paints this devastating picture of the gap between what society says it values and how people actually behave. And finally, we absolutely cannot talk about the tales without meeting one of literature's all-time greatest characters. She's a force of nature, an unforgettable rebel, the wife of Bath. In a time when women were expected to be quiet, meek, and obedient, the wife of Bath is gloriously, unapologetically loud. She's a successful business owner, a world traveler, and, get this, a veteran of 5 marriages. She just grabs control of the conversation and uses her own life as proof that experience, not just some old book, is the real key to understanding the world. And this one line just captures her perfectly. In Fellowship it Well, could she laugh and carpy? She's the life of the party. She thrives in a crowd, she loves to talk, and she has a great laugh. This is a woman who takes up space in the world and enjoys every single minute of it. And that really brings us to the core of Chaucer's genius. The noble public servant, the corrupt official who uses his position for profit, the bold entrepreneur who breaks all the rules. These aren't just medieval figures, are they? They are timeless human archetypes. So, here's the question I'll leave you with. As you go about your day, which of Chaucer's pilgrims do you still recognize?